Welcome back. I'm playing Mordheim City the Damned, and we have successfully completed the Witch Hunter campaign. So I will go through our unit builds and kind of give my thoughts on how I did and what if I'd recommend this for future playthroughs. Obviously, there's things I would do differently, because after you go through the campaign, you see what tends to work the best and what could have gone better. So I'll just kind of make my way through here. So I really like my build for the Witch Hunter Captain, but the bad thing about it is it totally defeats the whole purpose of his abilities. So he can become a very powerful tank, and because I don't put all those points into agility, I can max out his strength and his toughness, so that allows him to get a good amount of health, which allows him to tank additional shots. He's also able to max out his leadership and intelligence, so he gets pretty decent stun resistance, even though it says 24%. That's pretty high for this game, and he tends to pass pretty significantly, and then he gets some points into alertness here. And then with the leadership, I'm able to master the Warcry ability, which is something I always like to do. He does have the option to get 15 weapon skill, so that allows him to master the Web of Steel, which is the parry stance, and then he also gets a ton of accuracy, so he's actually not a bad critter, and he is easily able to get quick incision up. So in terms of his abilities, I gave him the Web of Steel because I think that's always the best option for any sort of tank that you're building, and then when you are getting it mastered, you can do up to 3 parry attempts per turn. I really like giving my leaders the Warcry ability because that increases damage everybody around them by 5 meters by 20%. By 20%. Now this build totally ignores the whole point of this whole ability, which doesn't feel good because it takes up one of your passive slots here. But what it is it increases your dodge chance by 10%. After a successful dodge attempt, it reduces the cost of a counterattack response by 1 offensive point. So if you turn this guy into a dodger, which I think would be reasonable, what I would probably do is just take these toughness points and put it up to here. Then I would get sidestep instead. And then what you could do with this is still kit this guy out and pretty similar stuff. You'd probably want to get rid of the armor proficiency, because that's going to lower your dodge chance by 15%. And as you can see, he's only 25% right now, but you got to remember that every point that you put into here is an additional 5%. You can give him light armor instead, and then that will totally bypass the whole issue. So you'd be at 40% right now. You could do 7, no, that's not right, 9 more. So that would be 45, so that would get you to 85% dodge chance with light armor on. And then you could end up still doing the shield specialist to increase the melee resistance. You could get quick incision, and then what I would do instead of the armor proficiency here is I would end up getting swift counter, and then between getting the reduced cost for continual counterattacks and the chance to refund points, I think that would turn him into a really good counterattacker for his dodges. Now, what I'm not quite sure about is it seems like a lot of the time when I have units that are dodging, they don't seem to counterattack nearly as much as my parry units do. And I'm not sure if that's because most of my dodging units usually have two-handed weapons and it just takes more offensive points to attack and I'm just not able to trigger it, or if there's really a difference between the chances of countering off of a parry versus a dodge. Because if you look at some of these abilities here, it talks about, this one was just a chance to hit, but I thought one of these actually increased. After a dodge attempt, you actually increased your chance to counter, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. But I thought there was actually a special ability out there for actually increasing your chance. Oh, so I guess it's just a chance to hit, not actually a chance to counter. So I think what I was about to say is wrong. But I think that's how you could do it if you wanted to maximize using Hunter's Patience here, because it definitely would give you some additional buffs here to help. It does not stack, so you just need to be aware of that. It's not going to get a bunch of free attacks, but you could potentially do that if you ended up getting him the swift counter. So I think that's how I would end up building this guy out. You could also turn him into a ranged hero, but I didn't find that to be necessary. I like tanks. He does a really good job of that. It feels really bad to waste Hunter's patience, but that's how it works. Alternatively, the Witch Hunter, compared to the Witch Hunter Captain, he works out really well as a tank, and he was actually one of my favorite units out of this whole area. And so he has kind of pretty similar stuff, 12 strength, some toughness. He has his intelligence maxed out, his leadership maxed out, 15 weapon strength, and the rest put into accuracy. So you can see pretty similar point distribution compared to the Witch Hunter Captain. So he's got the Web of Steel for the same reasons that the Witch Hunter Captain did, but then he has Purge the Heretic. So by giving him this one-handed weapon, he gets to get all these additional attacks. And so pretty much once you land an attack, you're going to get increased 20% damage for the next attack, so you can get several attacks where you're ending up getting bonus 20% damage. Now it doesn't stack, so it's not like 20, 40, 60 for the 4 attacks that you're going to be doing here. But as long as you land your attack, you'll get a 20% damage buff, and then if you add Warcry onto that, now you're up to 40%, and if you're critting, which he has a 17% chance to do, plus you can increase it even higher with some of the abilities that we'll go over, it can really give you some amazing damage output here. And then because he is a tank, he's able to take a bunch of hits. So, you know, he's got the quick incision, so every attack he lands will make it easier for the following attack to hit, allowing him to synergize with the Purge of the Heretic and everybody else attacking easier. He's got the Shield Specialist because we want to get that melee resistance as high as possible, so the chances of him getting hit go down, and his parry chance is high at 90%. He's got the armor proficiency, so he doesn't suffer movement penalties with the heavy armor, and he also gets increased armor absorption. And then he has swift counter to allow him to counterattack lots of times, because if you have a one-armed weapon, or a single-handed weapon, I guess I should call it, it takes one offensive point for a counterattack, and now I have an 80% chance to get that back, and he can parry up to 3 times a turn. So assuming he parried everyone and he landed those points back, that's 3 extra attacks per turn that he can potentially do. So that works out really well. Now the one downside to him compared to the Knight, which is probably a better version of this guy, is his perks are the magic resistance by 10%, whereas the Knight has immunity to terror and fear, things like that, whereas this guy doesn't. Now on the flip side is I don't think the Knight can retreat from battle. He always fights to the death, whereas this guy can bounce around a little bit. So that's the main benefit there. But definitely a unit I really like, and I might as well jump over to the Knight right now, since we were just talking about him here. And as I was alluding to, he has got the last stand, so he always fights to the death. So unfortunately, you know, it prevents use to flee and retreat, and he's immune to all alone, which is nice, so you can get him into situations where you don't have to worry about all alone checks. Likewise, he's really good at fighting demons and other monsters because he's immune to all those terror checks. But as you can see, you can turn him into a really good damage dealer. He can go up to 16 strength. So instead, I tend to cap it out at 12 because that'll allow me to master the armor. It will also allow me to master the amount of inventory space, so it maximizes it. And then I just like to make him a pure tank, so I get that toughness going up as much as possible to help him resist everything here. And then he was not really meant to be a dodger, but you can get up to 12, so that's decent. But I really like this kind of build. Now, I bypassed his leadership a lot of the time because, again, I'm not really using him to have to pass any sort of test, and that's the main thing there, and all alone checks. So I put all my points into intelligence. That way he could resist stuns a little bit better, and then he's got some points into alertness to increase his initiative a little bit, and I put a couple points into leadership because I was going back and forth about whether I was going to give him insult or not to allow him to further reduce melee resistance of his opponents, because that's actually a pretty good ability. For his weapon skill, he's got 17 out of 18. The big thing is just making sure you get up to 9 accuracy if you're going to use the build that I'm recommending, because you want to be able to maximize that quick incision, because it's just such a powerful ability. And likewise, this is going to look very similar to my other tank builds, because I just went with an all-tank army. So I have the Web of Steel. he has Stoic, which when he's engaged by 2 or more enemies, it increases his melee resistance by an additional 10%. It is not stackable, so it's just a one-time thing. But then you get Quick Incision, Armor Proficiency, Shield Specialist, and Swift Counter. So same reasoning as our other units there. So I really like that build. It works out very well with my play style. So that's those 3 guys. Now, I was not able to max out our Wolf Priest hero, but I really like these guys. He's a divine spellcaster. Sometimes newer players are a little confused with spellcasting because they think they may play other factions that are just arcane spellcasters, so you got to make sure you pay attention to which one this is, because arcane will definitely suffer penalties to their casting ability in heavy armor and other situations, whereas divine spellcasters do not. So that allows them to be more of a tankier spellcaster. So just be aware of that, so you don't have to make these guys light armored units and things like that, where you do with magisters or some of the other mages with the other factions. So again, for the same reason, because he's able to get access to a lot of things, I ended up giving him 12 strength so he can get heavy armor, and I put all the rest of my points into toughness, and then I did put a few points into agility just to increase his chance to climb, leap, jump down, things like that. I maxed out his intelligence because he actually has some very powerful spells, so I always recommend that, and I put the rest of the points into leadership. Now with his passive abilities, he already has a good chance of passing psychological tests, but you know, a little bit more never hurt anybody. And then because he cannot equip a shield, which is sad, I put a bunch of points into weapon skill, so he'll be able to use Web of Steel because he has a Helleber here, which is a two-handed weapon that allows you to parry. Alternatively, which I think a lot of the time I probably should have done, is I could have just given him a one-handed sword, and then he'd have 4 attacks instead of the 2 here, and then maybe switch him to the Helleber at the very end, but it is what it is, because a sword will allow you to get access to the parry ability too. So I think for large portions of the time I should have alternated between the 2 weapons depending on how many offensive points I had, because he was missing quite a few attacks with this. But what I was finding right now with 8 points is I would attack, get 2 attacks, and then if he parried, he'd get another attack, so that would be a way to get a 3rd attack with this guy. But you know, it is what it is, and I put the rest of the points into accuracy here. So in terms of his skills, I did end up giving him Web of Steel. His passive ability that was already given is Heart of the Wolf, so it increases his chance to pass all Alone, Fear, Terror, and Leadership tests by 35%, so that's nice. He's got the heavy armor, and then because I wanted to use this guy ideally as a massive spellcaster to buff my other units, I wanted to get Devotion, which decreases the chance of Divine Wrath by 15%. I wanted to get him Ulric's Chosen, which increases his spellcasting chances and increases his critical hit damage, but again, you're unlikely to crit with this guy with how I have him built out right now, but it is something to be done here, so I would have liked to max that out as well had I gotten those abilities. And then so I think in terms of the remaining spell, it kind of depends on the situation. If I was going to make him into a damage dealer, then I'd get him Ulric's Fury for increasing my spell damage by an additional 30% if I mastered that. And I'd probably want to give him either Ulric's Axe, which decreases his Divine Wrath chance, or give him a one-handed weapon so that he can attack for 2 offensive points instead of a tiring 2-handed weapon, so then he'd be able to attack, get that buff, use the spell, attack again, and throw another buff out as how you'd want to do it. So you got to kind of decide how you'd want to use this guy to decide on what abilities that you like to do. He also has some very interesting active abilities here too. So if you didn't want to put a bunch of stuff into the weapon skill and instead you want to turn him into a critter or something, you could give him Guard Stance, which will just increase your armor absorption by an additional 10%, which is like a 10% damage resistance here, and then you'd be you only have to put 9 points into weapon skill to get that, and that would be like your stance. Alternatively, if you wanted to turn him into a really good fighter, you could give him Righteous Fury. This is a really nice ability because it allows you to do regular damage. Yes, there's a penalty to hitting, but if you master it, it goes down to only a 10% chance to hit, and if you have them buffed with other units, abilities, you can easily negate that, and then it allows you to start reducing offensive and strategy points of your opponent. So that's definitely very powerful. So you can definitely turn this guy into a debuffer in addition to a buffer, and kind of going along those lines, the other ability that you could do if you wanted to, if you were going with a very crit heavy army, is you would give him Crush the Weak, and then you just run in there and you smack some guys, and if you mastered this, then you would reduce critical resistance by 30%. And when you have some of these guys' spells, like you do with Blessing of Ulric, that effectively is an AoE buff that sticks around for 2 turns, and it increases your melee hit chance by, or your melee critical hit chance by 10% and your critical hit damage by 20%. So now you can see how that can become very powerful if you're doing a crit build, because now all of a sudden you got a 20% higher, and for somebody like him, his baseline's 11%, so now he's going to be every 3 attacks, he's going to be critting. And then you can also give Ulric's Gift to other units, which increases their melee chance to hit and their damage by an additional 20%. So this is how things can really start to snowball pretty aggressively with these guys. Now, if you were going to turn him into a damage dealer with some spells, you could use things like Frostbite. So just at a base damage, it does 24 to 34. And so, you know, if you start having those other abilities, they increase it by 30%, plus every intelligence points increases damage by 3%, you know, so that's now 15 times 3 is 45, so that's 75% potential increased damage there. So now you're talking 30s to 40s damage for these spells here that you can do, so that's not insignificant. And then the other thing is you could do this Ice Storm, which does, it's an AoE attack. It has a pretty good range on there, but then this also allows you to start causing more offensive point losses, so that's nice. The other ability that could be really good here is the Wild Pack, and what that does is it grants immunity to fear, and it also provokes fear on engaged enemies, reducing their hit chance by 10%, and if you master that, that penalty goes up to 30%, and it affects both you and your allies. So that could be really nice if you're losing a battle against somebody and you need them to really have some decreased hit chances. Giving that Wild Pack on there could definitely work as your favor. So he, as you can see, he definitely has some very fun abilities and is a very powerful unit for you there. Whether he's going to be a true fighter or a buffer or a debuffer, you just got to decide what you want to do, or even a damage spellcaster too. So kind of a fun unit. The unit I completely underutilized, and I definitely would do differently, is this Warrior Priest here. I strongly recommend that you, if you're struggling on this Witch Hunter campaign, just level up 2 priests, and then you can take them out on missions, and then you just have 2 guys that can just heal themselves and everybody else on your party here for significant amounts of damage. I mean, they can heal upwards of 160 HP per turn per guy here, because they can do 80 heals per heal, and they can do it twice per turn once they get stronger. I feel like I said that confusing, but I think the point comes across. Now again, these guys are divine spellcasters, so they are able to wear heavy armor when they're using their spells. So, you know, I get them up to 12. That also gets you that inventory space toughness, so they can tank a hit. I did get their leadership and intelligence up. If you're going to use them as a damage dealer, I think you want to put more points into the intelligence like I did here. I was not totally sure whether the healing was fixed rates or not, but after trying it several times, it's in fact fixed. So if you're just going to use them as a healer and you don't need these points, I would recommend putting them more into leadership, because you're going to want to use him to hit and then heal, because that's how you can buff his spellcasting ability and success chances, and we'll get into that once we get into this skills. But because he does need to pass checks, you know, you can really screw yourself if he suffers a terror check and fails it, because then you're losing offensive points and you're not going to be able to heal as much. So I definitely overspent on the intelligence and would have put more of that into the leadership here. I think you could make an argument too that maybe you'd want to just increase initiative so you can heal faster, but honestly, I kind of liked them being towards the end, because then I could have everybody fight, and then whoever was the most injured, I could just run them over and start healing at the end of that. Now, I put 16 points into weapon skill. The reason for that is when I was running story mission or campaign skirmish missions, he'd have a one-handed weapon and a shield, so that way he would be able to use the parry abilities with the web of steel and keep him alive much easier on skirmish missions. But on story missions, I would give him the two-handed hammer here because that would reduce the chances of him triggering Divine Wrath, because on the story missions I was having him heal pretty much every turn. And then a couple of points into the accuracy here. So regarding his abilities, I recommend the Web of Steel to keep him alive. He gets Divine Rage at baseline, so what that does is when dealing melee damage, it increases spell casting chance for the next spell by 15%, and that has to be the next action. So what you don't want to do, and what I am notoriously guilty about doing on this campaign, is I would attack and I'd kill a unit, or even just hit them, but then after I get the kill, I would then search the equipment pile because I want to see what kind of goodies I get, and then I'd heal afterwards. But because I searched for loot before I healed, my spell chance then went down by 15%. So you really just gotta kind of pace yourself, and if you're gonna heal, you want to heal. And make that your next action to be able to take full advantage of this Divine Rage ability here, because especially early on these guys will fail their healing chances pretty significant amounts of the time, and that can definitely not feel good, especially if you've been playing with more of the Chaos factions where you're having Globadiers, which are always guaranteed heals. I gave him Quick Incision. I think you could argue that I should put those points somewhere else because I don't know if it really made a big difference with him. Especially because he's not going to get the mastery, but I did it. It worked out really well early in the game. If you're going to hire one that's later game, bypassing Quick Incision probably would be a worthwhile use of your points. I like to give him the armor proficiency. That way he can get the heavy armor and still get good movement. Definitely need to get the devotion mastered on this guy to reduce those Divine Wrath chances, because without it, unless you're getting really good equipment or formulas to reduce it, you're going to be getting well into the 20s to 30s if you're doing 2 heals per turn, and that's just asking for problems because he can get nuked. And in fact, he killed himself on one of my campaign missions, which was catastrophic. Now thankfully it was right at the end and he recovered, but that could have just totally been knocking me out. And then the other thing I would have done had I gotten this guy mastered is I thought this was kind of like a paladin where you do the healing with the lay on hands here, the healing hand, and I thought I'd always have to be right next to him, but that is not in fact how that ability works. In fact, you can give him piety, and that increases the range of the spells by 5 meters, and then at mastery it goes up by 10, so that significantly increases the where this guy can heal from, which is very important, especially if you guys are using him as a tank like I like to do, especially on skirmish missions, because he can be using the shield and his one-handed weapon. He can be in the melee, he can attack, get the increased spell check and or spell casting buff, and then heal somebody that's around him instead of right next to him without that. So piety, I would definitely recommend getting that for his ability, and probably even mastering it for that 10 meters, because that will significantly improve him. But if you didn't have the points, you could do that. So I think I would get the piety and then maybe even shield specialist here as my alternative options. I don't think I would have gotten any of those abilities. So regarding his spells though, always saving up to get the healing hand going, because that restores 80 wounds per heal, and like I said, you'll do it twice with once you get into the 8 offensive points. Otherwise, for most of the game, you'll be attacking, get the increased spell casting chance, and then heal. And so that's all the more reason why you'd want that piety on there, so you can get them into combat and then heal somebody else that's nearby to be able to get them those buffs. And then Deny the Heretic is always a good ability. It allows you to steal offensive points and decrease the chance of your opponents hitting you. I did not really like Immaculate Flesh. I guess it's good against when you're fighting Skaven who are poisoning you all the time, because it allows you to remove that. But the big thing to realize is it doesn't get rid of debuffs, so there's no reason for you to use it there. Now, if you did want to use him, you could, as a buffer, you know, the Shield of Faith, if you're fighting somebody that's casting a lot of spells, then I guess you could do that. But again, it's not a good use of your points because you don't fight enough spellcasters. Word of Damnation, I didn't really find to be worth it either, because I didn't really have anybody that was regularly causing fear or terror unless I put other abilities on them. Now, I think what you're supposed to do is synergize that with Armor of the Righteous, because that allows you to provoke fear, and then if you throw Words of Damnation onto whoever he's fighting, then you're going to increase their chance of failing to pass the fear test. But again, you have very limited spell points, so I think healing and doing an AoE debuff to your enemies is a much better use of your resources. If you were going to be doing, big heavy tank builds, and you could do Prayer of Absolution, because that's an AoE buff which increases armor absorption by 5 and dodge and parry chance by 10% at the baseline, and that goes up to 10 and 20% when you get it mastered. So definitely things to take into consideration. And then I can't imagine you would actually do this with this guy, but if you wanted to make him a damage spellcaster, you could use Soulfire, and that's an AoE attack that allows you to do some decent damage here. But again, it was just a bad use of my intelligence points, because I definitely over-leveled the intelligence for what I needed, because I don't think any of these things take more than 15. So those were points that were just poorly spent and should have gone into the leadership here. So hopefully that gives you a little better idea of how to use these warrior priests. Like I said, I definitely would do it much better. And then, because you can give them the Sigmarite Warhammer, which at the purple version will reduce the Divine Wrath chance by 6%. You can get abilities, Devotion, to reduce it even further. I think this goes up to 8 or 9% when you get the purple version of it, so then that can definitely help. And then you get the shield on there, but the default Sigmarite Great Hammer, which is the two-handed weapon, has a Divine Wrath chance of -12. So, I guess it would be about equal. No, that's not true, so it's 12 plus 6, that's 18 right there. Whereas this will be just barely 12, which would be the baseline for the two-handed weapon. So again, you just gotta know what you're doing here to get him here. And then the other thing you could do is you can get Pendants of Concentration to increase spellcasting chances. And there's also one that's Reach that'll increase the range of your spells that you could use on this guy as well. And then you could, if you found that formula, then you could, I suppose, not use the Piety and use those points for something else, which would be really cool. But you just gotta keep into consideration how you're doing it. But that's my thoughts on the Warrior Priest, because I definitely made him a much weaker healer for most of the game than he should have been. So pretty much as soon as you get access to these guys, you want to start leveling them so you can get that healing going. Otherwise, the alternative option is you just go through potions. Thankfully, the Witch Hunter campaign does give you a lot of potions, but because I'm such a whore for picking up money and items on the missions, I don't like to have them the healing potions in my inventory, because I like to just run around and pick up all the free gear that's on the map. So it didn't really work for my playstyle, but especially if you were like, I don't care about this warp stone and this other stuff on the campaign map, because a lot of them doesn't really make a lot of sense for the amount of effort you got to put into it. You can complete the mission really quick by just doing the objectives and then use the healing potions. So, for our impressive, I really like this guy. He has a very good crit chance at 38% with our current weapon here, and there were times where he would crit 3 out of his 4 attacks. He just did a lot of really good work for me. I was not sure how I wanted to build him out for most of the game, but what I finally settled on is maxing out his strength, maxing out his agility, turning him into a dodger. A large portion of the map, or the game, I was thinking, well, maybe if I get his parry high enough with all this weapon skill, I'll turn him into just a web of steel, and then I can take all these points and put it into toughness and make him into a really powerful tank, especially because he can put on light armor. But I just didn't find that that worked out very well. And then at least the agility also increases his melee resistance, so that it decreases the chance of him getting hit. So I still think this is probably the best way to build him out. I put a bunch of points into intelligence. I think you could make an argument that I should put some more points from there into the leadership and stop the alertness at 15. That way I could have mastered insult to get him additional abilities. I guess in retrospect that might be something I would consider doing, because I could do it pretty easily here. And then I maxed out his accuracy to 20 just for all that crit chance, and then the weapon skill to increase his chance of hitting. Regarding his abilities, he has a really good buff for your units here, and it lasts you can cast it pretty much every 2 turns. But this Pyre of Righteousness allows you to increase the chance to pass alone, fear, and terror by 30%, and increases melee and ranged hit chance by 10% as long as you're within the aura of the Pyre. So for a lot of the game, I didn't realize it affected the ranged hit chance too. So especially early on, if you're trying to train your archers or smugglers and you're having trouble hitting, just throw them onto the Pyre area here, and you can definitely increase the chance to hit. Now, in terms of his abilities, I got him a Quick Incision. Obviously, by turning him into a critter, he'll easily be able to get to the Quick Incision Mastery. He's got Fatality for an additional 10% critical hit chance. So as you can see, he lands an attack. Now all of a sudden his crit chances go up to 48%, which is pretty nice. I like giving him awareness, so he just has a straight up 10% melee resistance buff. Deep Wounds to increase his critical hit damage by 20%, because this guy will be critting a ton, and therefore it's useful to have that. Sidestep in order to get him his mastery there. And then regarding his last abilities, I think you could make a strong argument to give him Weak Spot Mastery, because that allows you to bypass the dodge and parry chance, and the reason for that is on these heavier weapons, it automatically, because it's slow, they get a 10% dodge chance, and so that negates that, so he should not be getting dodged as much. Alternatively, if you're finding that you're throwing him into situations where he's going to be swarmed by enemy units frequently, you can do Underdog, which will increase his crit chance by 15% if you master that, and end up giving him attacked by 2 or more units there. So that's another option, but I don't like situational buffs myself, because I find I just like to get the same thing consistently all the time, and therefore I think going with a weak spot would be a better option there, and it generally makes a lot of sense if you're going to go with a two-handed weapon. So that's how I would have put a lot of my other abilities into here. He still has 8 points, so I would have maxed that out. That would have gotten him 2 points left, and I would have gotten him Insult. So then, you know, he's going to cast Pyre, he's going to Insult, and then he would have the weak spot. Alternatively, you could just put 1 point into here, and then you could master the Insult here. And the benefit of that is once you end up mastering it, I think it reduces melee resistance by 20%, so that significantly will increase your chance to hit, especially on things like the Manticore, which when it lands, it decreases your chance to hit with that dust cloud. You can really negate that effectively by using the Insult ability. Now, regarding our other units here, the Henchmen, I really like the Zealots. They're good strength, good toughness, pretty decent leadership, okay intelligence. They can do decent weapon skills. In fact, this one I think has an injury, right? Yeah, so his weapon skill is artificially lowered by 1. It usually would go up to 12, and then they can get the accuracy up. So, you know, overall, he's a pretty decent unit. This is the build I really recommend on these guys. Get them the Web of Steel, burn the Witch. That way you can end up affecting spellcasters if you're fighting them, because they can be a nightmare to deal with. And then Fanatical Zeal increases their chance to hit by 5%. Now, the thing to know about this is you want to use it before you start attacking, because it only and you have to use it every turn effectively, because it only lasts for 1 turn. But you also want to make sure that you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to want to flee or retreat, because that debuff will last for 2 turns. So just remember that you got to use it each turn. Now, he has the passive ability of Vengeance, so when he receives damage, it increases his melee damage that it'll do in return by 10%, and that lasts for 2 turns, and it's stackable. So the more these guys get hit, the more damage they can do, which is why I like to make them kind of tanky here, so they can take all those hits. Give him the Shield Specialist, and that way he can parry and increase melee resistance. Quick Incision for the attacks. Flash Parry to increase his parry chance even higher, because it's only 83%. And then I finish it off with a Swift Counter, so if you're not charging in there, you'll have 1 extra point. So if he keeps attacking and parrying, then he can potentially get 2 extra attacks per turn. Now, these guys can be used as archers as well, and he did very good as an archer. How I ended up leveling these guys is they'll give him 3 strength, so that way he's got a little bonus inventory spot. I max out their agility for the dodge in case he gets engaged into melee, which happens not infrequently, and then as much points into toughness as I can, so when he does get attacked, he can then switch to his melee weapon and take some hits. Getting the leadership maxed out was the first priority with these guys, so he doesn't fail his all alone checks in case he does get swarmed, and then the rest of the points went into intelligence. And then I just maxed out his ballistic skill, which can go up to 15, and then the rest of the points I put into accuracy. Regarding what I did for these guys here, now unfortunately if you turn them into a ranged unit, that effectively negates the bonuses of Vengeance unless they get attacked into melee. But I gave him quick reload so he can reload easier, bullseye to increase the chance to hit by 10% when aiming, trick shooter because by bypassing range resistance it increases your chance of hitting, and then eagle eyes allows you to do bonus damage because you were able to get through 5% of the armor absorption. And in terms of his abilities, he's got sidestep in case he does get engaged into melee. This is a Witch Hunter specific ability. Trial by Pain, pretty much it's a regular damage, but if you hit, they get a debuff that every time they're going to attack for 1 turn, they suffer 5 to 15 damage. So that allows you to get some bonus damage on units. And the alternative option is you can just do Crippling Shot, and that steals an offensive point away from your opponent. Definitely works really well, especially if you're fighting units that have 2-handed weapons. Because that 1 offensive point may totally screw him out of an attack. Now, in terms of our other hero, or not hero, our other henchman, I have the Flagellant. These guys were okay. They're dodge damage dealers effectively. So I put some points into strength. You can get them up to 6 for the bonus inventory spots. You can max out their agility at 15, and then the rest of the points I put into toughness. That way they'll be able to take some hits. They are immune to any sort of checks because of their ability, so you don't have to put much into intelligence here. So instead, or into leadership. So instead, I put most of my points into the intelligence. Unfortunately, they only go up to 6 because they're quite stupid, so they don't have a lot of stun resistance here. And then the rest of the points went into alertness, and so these guys will frequently be the first units that get to move on a map. And then I maxed out their weapon skill, and the rest of the points went into accuracy. Now, I suppose you could potentially just focus on making these guys critters, but I decided to elect to go for guaranteed hits too, because I find that these 2-handed weapons miss quite frequently. Now, the one downside to these guys is they can't use great swords, because if they could, that would give you increased crit chance. Since he's already at 19%, then I'd probably put some more into there to get that going. But in terms of their abilities, they have Fanaticism, which is the one that gets them immunity to all alone, fear, and terror. But the nice thing about that is even though they're fanatics, they can still retreat. So you can use these guys to fight, and then once they take a bunch of damage, retreat them and then get somebody else in there. Quick Incision to increase the chance to hit. I had to give them a little buff to their avoid because these guys don't have any armor, so I don't want them getting hit. So that allowed them to increase the chance of avoid. I did give him awareness, which will just give him 5% melee resistance, which is nice. And then I gave him a weak spot to try to increase the chance of him landing attacks. And then he's got sidestep, he's got the fanatical zeal, again increases the chance to hit, and then burn to witch in case you are fighting a spellcaster to try to stop him from buffing and affecting you so much. So, with that, I think that's pretty much all of our characters. This one is the one I was going to try to make into a dodger, but I just never got to use them enough because I was so successful on our missions that I just never had to trade these guys in. But I was going to try to make this one into a critter, dodge damage dealer type situation was kind of my thought process for him. So I was going to give him sidestep mastery, have him here. I did give him a little bit of bonus to avoid. In retrospect, I probably would take that away, but I was thinking I would get him some light armor instead of clothing, so he has a little bit of damage absorption, try to get that fatality as high as possible, and then move around, trying to keep him in like a sword and shield build. That way he'd be able to maximize his counterattacks. But again, I'm not sure if that would have worked out. I didn't get to use them enough to really know, but that was my thought process on building one of these guys out, but I just never did. And then the other hero, if you're wondering why I'm one short, the other hero would be a smuggler, but unfortunately mine got killed towards the end of the campaign, so I never got to fully max those out. Now, I do get access to those with, I think, the mercenaries and possibly the sisters of Sigmar, so I'll try to level one of those up in the future and see what we can do here to play around with one and try it, because she could be either a really good crit melee unit or a really good ranged hero, but ranged heroes are very squishy, and that's effectively what happened. Is she got charged by a matriarch with a two-handed weapon that had a bunch of strength, and she landed 2 attacks and just totally floored her. So that was definitely a major bummer, but hopefully that gives you some ideas for builds for your Witch Hunter campaign. I definitely found that compared to some of the other campaigns I've done, I suffered a lot more casualties and injuries, but again, I think that's because I just got to be pretty sloppy with my gameplay since I had access to Globadiers for so long, and I was just used to spamming those guaranteed heals, and I was way too slow on getting my Warrior Priests up and running to get them to be able to heal up my units. So I think it was my own fault that so many guys ended up getting injured or killed on this campaign. I was just not utilizing my healers, my buffers appropriately, because I totally forgot about that devotion ability, and I'm so sorry to the subscriber that told me about this while I was playing I think he sent me some messages about that on the Undead campaign, but by the time I finally got to these guys, I had forgotten about that message, and then as soon as I discovered that ability, I'm like, shit, he totally warned me about this and I totally forgot. So I was very, very sad about that. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.